If there's one thing we've learned about business and life, it's that people are the X factor. They constantly surprise us, both in amazing ways and not so much. We're Ben and Syya, and welcome to the Gnaw On This Business Bytes podcast. This show is all about real life things we all deal with every day, how they relate to business, and how to make some sense out of our daily chaos. Welcome to the show. And welcome back to another episode of Gnaw On This Business Bytes. I'm Ben and this is Syya. So here's a question. Would you rather speak in public or tear your arm off? Seriously. I love speaking in public, but I know that most people don't. Most people, it terrifies. It absolutely terrifies. And it doesn't matter if it's a room of 3 or a room of 3,000. And the question is why? Is it a matter of insecurity? Is it a matter of not feeling good enough about yourself? Is it a matter of not feeling good enough, that you don't know your topic well enough? Is it a matter of feeling insecure about how you look or how you present yourself or how you act or how you walk? I don't know. You know what? For different people, it's different things. But we need to sit there and say, okay, certain people like to talk in public. Certain people don't. The challenge is you have people that sit there and say, oh yeah, you need to go speak at this event. Well, there are people out there that just don't want to go speak at that event. And just because your boss wants you to, and they think, well, I'm doing them a favor by making, sending them to speak at the event because I'm going to elevate them. Well, what they'd rather do is just crawl into a hole and die. And we need to be cognizant of these people. Yes, some people we need to push a little bit. Some people we absolutely need to push a little bit. But we also need to be cognizant that there are people out there that this just isn't what they should be doing because it's just not them. So, Syya, let's gnaw on this.
My friend. Look.
Mon amigo.
Mon ami. Let me explain to you, Lucy.
Let me explain, Lucy.
Look, we know extroverts. No problem. They have no problems going out there. Here's where my brain goes with extroverts, introverts. Extroverts, it's damn easy for us. We just stand up. We're like, woo, we'll talk about anything. What you want?
Yeah. What do you want to talk about? Let's go.
Because we get our energy off the audience. Right. Mm-hmm. And so introverts, it's their own internal energy that's going to have to be produced in order to exert that kind of, presence or energy, if you want to call it that. So I get it, but I don't think it's necessarily just an extrovert introvert thing. I do think there's a certain amount of confidence on, are they comfortable with the topic, or whatever life experiences they've previously had. And so the way I think of it this way is I kind of want to, if you're okay with exploring, is some of the tips that we would recommend for folks. Because for me, I'm a trained Disney University presenter. Okay. So
right.
I spent time with the Disney company and they taught us some really great techniques. And one of the things I would highly suggest those that are concerned about public speaking. And I know I am not the smoothest public speaker. You put me on a TEDx stage, they're going to be like, oh, she's one of those speakers. They're the ones that are like off the beaten path types. Cause I'm an entertainer in that way. Right. I'm not going to be that kind that's like telling their story. And then at the very end, there's going to be that end hook where they're like, and then there was, blah, blah. I'm not that kind. Right. But find a technique that works for you. Sometimes if you're going to do a presentation, I think my first or speaking engagement, number one for me is prepare. And what prepare means, it can mean multiple things, right? It could be write out your speech, write out an outline of your speech, understand what your purpose of your speech is. Like, what is your end goal? It's not just standing up there to say, hey, look at me. It's what is that you want the audience to take away from your speech, right?
Exactly.
But it's also, to some degree, if you were listening in that audience, what would you want to see out of that presenter? And can you yourself personally deliver on it? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. So you have to figure out where your priority is for that. So that's where I'm kind of shifting our conversation to, because I think those tips and tricks are really helpful for people who'd rather die. Because it's enough to say, yeah, I'd rather die, but like, how else would you help? What else would you offer for
Well, and I
someone?
think that's really important because every speaker can get better.
Yes.
I don't care how many years you've been on the stage. I don't care how many audiences you've spoken in front of. You can always get better. I mean, I spoke during COVID to 67 different virtual audiences.
Mm.
I hated every single one of them. And the reason I hated it is because there was no engagement. There was no interaction. You had no idea who the audience was, whether they were feeling, whether they were with you, whether they were against you, whether they were listening, whether they weren't listening, whether you were impactful, whether you were not impactful. There was nothing. There was absolutely nothing. If you were lucky at the end, you got somebody that actually asked a question.
Yeah.
And that was phenomenal. But for the most part, at the end of your talk, it was like, thank you, click, and you're gone. And it felt like a void. And speaking in public is a conversation.
Mm.
You're having a conversation, whether you're ever having a conversation with one person or 10,000, you're having a conversation. Your goal is to sit there going, I want to explain to you about X. I want to teach you about X. I want you to be able to do this at the end or learn this at the end that you didn't do now. I want everybody to walk away with one little tidbit that they can use tomorrow or today to make their lives better. Now, Sally's going to learn something different from Syya, that's going to learn something from Alan, that's going to learn something different from Tim. But every single person is going to learn something from my talk that's going to make their life better. That's what the aim is. You don't always get there, but that's what the goal needs to be. And I think that every speaker, when you're starting out, tries to do too much.
Mm.
They
What do you
try
mean?
to do too much. You try to give too much information. You try to be too smart. You try to be the head in the room. You try to use too big words. You try to use, analogies that are immaterial to the audience in front of you. The key thing is know your audience. If you're speaking to engineers, speak like an engineer. If you're
Mm-hmm.
speaking to lawyers, speak like a lawyer. If you're speaking to electricians, speak like an electrician. And use analogies and stories and references that make sense to them. I've given the same keynote address across North America and worldwide maybe 125 times.
Mm.
I doubt I've given the exact same keynote more than 3 times. I've given different stories. I've used different analogies. I've done different cadence, different references, brought in different ideas. The end concept is the same. The end goal is the same. But the stories that I use are different based on who's in the audience and what do they need to get out of it. I love when I'm actually going to a conference. I don't just fly into the conference, sit in the green room, go out on stage, do my thing, get back in the limousine and head to the airport. I'm there for the weekend. And I'll do a workshop and I'll meet people at the workshop and I'll go to lunch and I'll talk to people on the trade show floor, et cetera, and I'll gain information about the people in the room and I'll use that information. And sometimes I'll even use people's names in my keynote. And that makes me personable to them. And all of a sudden people say, oh, he mentioned me.
Right.
And all of a sudden it makes it real to a certain human being. And as speakers, nobody else knows our speech like I do. You might have given that same speech 100, 125 times. They've only heard it once.
Right.
So if you mess up, nobody knows.
Oh, I love that you mentioned that. Yes.
Nobody knows because they weren't there for the rehearsal. They weren't there last week when you gave it. They weren't there last month when you gave it. And they don't know that you used this reference instead of this reference, or this story versus that story. That you say, oh, I really should have used this story over that. Nobody cares. Nobody knows. They want to know is how did it impact them? If it impacted them, it was a great talk. That's what matters. See ya.
I agree, dude. Like, let me tell you, I had to look down here because you reminded me of this one conference that we were at, and they hired Colin Quinn to be the keynote.
Mm-hmm.
And not Colin Jost, because I know some young kids of SNL. It's Colin Quinn.
Very
was
different.
in the 90s, but he too was also at the desk. But anyway, weekend update. But I just happened to randomly be standing right next to him as we were crossing the street to get into the conference. And he was like, it was jovial enough. I mean, it was pleasant enough to the rest of us because I recognized him instantly. I said, holy crap, dude. Like, I love you. And he laughed. Yeah. He did not love me back as much. But that being said, what I did notice was...
But he appreciated it.
Oh, I'm sure he did. I mean, come on. Come on, look at this. I'm kidding.
Who wouldn't appreciate being loved by Syya?
Of course. Because it doesn't happen often. No, but what struck me is because maybe he stopped loving me after I stalked him a few aisles. But I wasn't really stalking him. It was something that I just observed.
It was just following him incessantly. Yeah.
Well, we were just happened to be going down the same 10 rows, people. I'm kidding. No, I did not do that, you guys. I swear to God, I didn't. Colin, I swear to God, it wasn't me. But what I did notice, though, he was with his assistant or agent. I don't know who he was with. Yeah. Or it might have been the handler of the conference. But he sat there and he looked down. And this is, in the early 2000s. So this is before the smartphone maps and all that. So he's looking down like at a printed map. And he goes, okay, who are the top people here? And I could hear him asking, who are the top people here? Who has rivalries?
Yes.
And people started rattling off. And I thought it was amazing because then he started going up and down some of these booths and he's talking to certain people and he's like, what's your name? And he's like, okay, all right, Billy. Kid you not, like you just said. That night in the keynote, that man fracking tore it up with his dry, witty sense of humor, but he named names.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, how good it was. It was delicious how good he delivered it.
Yeah.
And it was so perfect because it was relevant. He did do a lot of his existing jokes, but then he pulled it all back in and made it. I mean, if you didn't know better, you would have thought he had been in technology forever. He did such a superb job. And I was really impressed by that. And that's where, again, takes practice, takes time, takes give a damn, all that good stuff that, we were talking about in a previous episode, talking about how to stand out. Well, guess what, guys? Here we go.
Well, and that's the thing is that if you have one speech and you never deviate from it, you're relevant to 3% of the people. You're relevant to 3% of the people. If you have one speech and you're comfortable enough with it that you can sit there and say, okay, I'm now giving this speech to lawyers. How do I change this speech slightly to make it relevant to lawyers? All of a sudden, 95% of the people in the room are leaning forward and interested. And it doesn't take a lot of work. It might take half an hour or an hour's worth of research.
Yeah.
It might mean a conversation with the show organizer. It might mean a conversation with, as you said, a couple of the top people at the show. It might mean going to a couple of the booths and having a couple conversations with people and writing a few notes. But it comes down to being curious and it comes down to caring. And if you're curious about your audience and you care about your audience, you will always do well for your audience. And it's not about being loud. It's not about being gregarious. It's not about being funny. It's about being impactful. And you can be quiet.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes.
And you can be thoughtful.
Yes.
And you don't have to be dynamic.
True.
And you can still take an audience and bring them to their feet. And
Hundo.
and it's about sitting there going, did the audience walk away going, oh my God, I learned something. Wow, that was a new way of thinking about this. And I think and that's what everybody who goes to a keynote address or a workshop or whatever, they're looking for one thing. They're not looking for 100 things.
Mm-mm.
They're looking for one thing that they can sit there and say, I can hang my hat on this and I can implement this and my life is going to be a little bit better. So don't overcomplicate things. Don't try to be the smartest person in the room. Don't try to be the person that is funny if you're not.
Yeah.
And enjoy the time, because your job on stage is to educate and have a conversation. And that's it.
Look, everything I think is 100%. I do think from just a pure tactical perspective, for those that really do want to improve your speaking and presentation skills, seriously consider going to a couple improv sessions.
Absolutely.
There's something about improv that loosens up your mind to accept, to try things. The most introverted comedians I know have background in improv.
Mm-hmm.
And most comedians are introverts, by the way, which I think is funny. People would, say that, but I think just having that kind of push your boundaries a little bit, but also they do teach great techniques to keep yourself calm, engaged, comfortable, because we also know in presentations, SHIT happens.
Exactly.
And so that's maybe will diminish some of the anxiety that I know people have, which is, oh my God, what if my PowerPoint goes down, or if I say the wrong words or whatever. That would be my suggestion for those that are really wanting to pursue a speaking, or at least better refine your speaking skills.
Better refine your speaking career. So let's leave it there. I'm Ben.
And I'm Syya.
And we'll see you soon.
Hey. Thanks for listening to another episode of Gnaw On This, Business Bytes. If you liked what you heard, we most humbly ask that you like, share, and hit that subscribe button. And if you want to communicate more effectively within your organization, contact Ben at yourbrandmarketing.com or me at brilliantbeammedia.com. We can help you build your community, brand awareness, and personality through digital content and podcasting. We cannot wait to hear from you. So see you next week for another episode of Gnaw On This, Business Bytes.